Our next session, I'll invite my panelists to come on stage, is going to be about innovation management. That is not just innovation as a buzzword or a theory or a big idea or something that management consultants regale you with, but in fact, how do you roll up your sleeves and actually do innovation at your company or your organization? To help us think about this, please welcome out Peter Diamandis, who is the chairman and chief executive of the X Prize Foundation, co-founder of Singularity University, and numerous other organizations we'll hear a little bit about. Patty Morrison of Cardinal Health, welcome.
Thank you.
And Guy Wollaert of Coca-Cola. Again, welcome. Please give them a round of applause. Peter, why don't we start with you?
Okay.
You're a renowned innovation guy. The X Prize, I think, especially being here in Northern California, many of you will know, helped bring back the incentive prize into vogue. There was a time a few hundred years ago with the Longitude Prize and Napoleon's Prize that there was much more commonly in use, but you've brought it back for space, for autos, and numerous other things. Singularity University is not so far away from here. Also encourages innovation. But I don't want you to wax philosophical today. I want to bring you down to earth where the rest of us are and actually talk to us about when you are at, for example, Singularity University or one of your other startups. The vision is great, we get it, but how do you actually get people to innovate in your organization? In other words, as a manager,
Sure.
How do you do that? And what are the techniques that work?
So for me, it's about a couple of key parts. One is an extraordinary vision, really a huge, powerful, unifying vision. And the second is not thinking out of the box, but actually creating such a small box that people throw away everything that previously exists.
What does
right?
that mean?
So notionally, listen, if you're at Cardinal Health or Coca-Cola and you're looking to drive innovation and you give people all of the money, time, and resources they need, we are inherently lazy in that regard, and we'll take all the time, the money, and the resources that we have. And you will incrementalize. Everybody feels failure. Most organizations penalize failure, and so we take incremental steps. If, on the other hand, what you end up doing, this is what an X Prize effectively does, if you instead say, listen, you don't have all that time, money, and people. In fact, you've got 1/10 the time, 1/10 the money, 1/10 the number of people, and this is your epic vision you're going after, what happens? First of all, most people say, cannot be done, and they step away. Those people who say, listen, I'll give it a shot, realize that failure is the likely outcome, so failure is okay. And what do? They throw away everything that was a pre-existing old way of doing things because they know it can't be done the old way. And they have zero chance of trying to do it. And what they really do is they say, okay, how could it possibly be done? And they take a huge amount of risk and take a shot at that. And ultimately, most will fail, but if someone actually succeeds within that small box of constraints, you then end up with a true innovation. You've broken through. You've done something in an extraordinary amount of time. And so at SU, at X Prize, we teach about these methodologies of innovation and breakthroughs. And that's, for us, it's about how do we take large companies. We do this. I just finished with 26 companies. That's what they call our Innovation Partners Program, really showing what are the best techniques to force innovation and allow for failure and risk-taking so you benefit from it.
Now, you talked about the small box. You talked about encouraging that kind of experimentation and failure, right? Lots of times it will mostly failure. Does this mean you need to have lots of little boxes? Does it mean you need more employees or more multiple attempts at the same target, all at the same time?
Yes, and in fact, that's what's you ask the question: Do entrepreneurial teams in Silicon Valley really have that much more success rate than the large companies? No, but the number of small companies outstrip the large corporations by 100-fold, and you only hear about the successes.
Right.
The majority of them fail. And so inside an organization, the question is, how can you enable your employee base of 10,000 or 150,000 or your consumer base of hundreds of millions or billions to become innovative teams for you, right, where you benefit from their experimentation? And serial failure is fantastic if it's towards an epic vision on the way towards a success.
on that note, let's turn to Patty. Patty, Cardinal Health, for those of you that are not as familiar, is a health services company. You're a giant in your field, medical, pharma distribution, I think, some manufacturing, but you're a big company.
Right.
And how do you think about what Peter has just said in terms of entrepreneurship within your large organization? How do you keep nimble?
I think it's interesting that the concept of giving people a lot of money, time, and problems to solve exists for most companies, but people don't know how to innovate, really. And so what we've tried to do is get people to focus on very time-boxed. I love the time boxing. 2 weeks, you're all in a room together. Here's a small problem. Typically, how do you learn about customer problems? And so the time boxing, small sprints, whether it's in developing things or actually figuring out problems, has been a really great approach. I think more broadly, as you're looking across, what are the fundamental skills you need to drive innovation? One of the things that we've been focused on is analytics. Everybody earlier today already talked about all the data that's getting created, the thing-to-thing, people-to-people, huge amounts of information. And we have to teach our organization how to do analytics. The world that's even taught in business schools are about what happened in the past, the row column thinking, not about what's going to happen in the future. And so that's another approach that we've taken, is building this foundation of each person knowing how to get data, how to do basic analytics, how to think about a customer's problem, how to time box small problems, and give the teams the opportunity to do that.
On the question of data analytics, when one of the things that that's important for companies to do is when a group or a team or individual fails, that the right lessons are learned, that the lessons are disseminated, right? Most of us, of course, even though we know this is true, we know about fast failure. I think most of us here have read the management books, are familiar with the mantras: fail gracefully, share the lessons. Let me just have a quick show of hands. Hands up. How many of you have put your? How many of you would consider yourselves innovative and supporters of innovation? Hands up. Okay. Now keep your hands up. How many of you put all your failures at the top of your resume? Right, exactly. Right, so obviously, we're all type A personalities. We like to succeed. We hope people forget those episodes where we didn't quite pull it off. And that's especially within large organizations.
You have to
How do you deal with that?
You do.
With your emphasis on analytics and data? Have you found systems or ways of overcoming that intuitive bias so that you actually share the lessons learned from some failed experiment?
So we just did one. We called it Project Dazzle. It was a 2-week sprint project, pilot, quick learning to solve a problem. And we did a presentation to the 2 business CEOs and the head of sales. And I literally, as the sponsor of the program, had to coach our executives. Look, they had 2 weeks. They didn't solve world hunger. They solved this one problem. You need to celebrate it, get the learnings. And I think re-emphasizing that cultural aspect of behavior of leaders and how they respond to failure and learning versus I got a return on investment is a really big challenge. So the executive team at Cardinal is very committed to this. And we talk about it all the time as a leadership group, how our behaviors actually influence that.
Let me turn to our final speaker to weigh in on these issues. We have a representative. He's from a very small, young company known as Coca-Cola, just up and coming. No, seriously, you're a 125-year-old plus company. And you make one very, very profitable product, as well as many, many other products. But you got something right early on. It's very easy not to innovate and just to milk the cow, as it were. How do you make sure that your dinosaur dances? How do you keep the culture of innovation at a big and old company?
How much time have we got? To
you got 3 minutes.
So there's so many dimensions to this answer, and I think it goes back. Let's go back to the definition of innovation you gave earlier, Vijay. Is something new plus adding value, and then it goes to the definition of value is, of course, it's economic value, but it's also value to the communities and societies in which we operate, and as we saw earlier discussed, sustainable value in terms of the planet in which we operate. So you have to kind of innovate against all of those dimensions. Now, yes, we want everyone to be participating in the movement of innovation and be innovative, and we're not doing such a bad job. I mean, in the last 5 years, we added $4 billion brands to our portfolio in tea, in juices, in water, and also in soft drinks. So that's good. But that's innovation for the core. And that's what we refer to as tier 1 innovation. And then there's innovation for the adjacent business. And you probably want the people that deal with the day-to-day business to focus on driving incremental innovation in all areas, those 4 dimensions that I just mentioned, right, around the core and adjacent. But there's then innovation that we refer to as tier 3, which is breakthrough and disruptive innovation. How do we disrupt ourselves? And you don't want our 700,000 associates around the world in 207 countries to ask this question. And I think that is where you actually want to empower a group of people, very distributed but connected, that share common purpose and vision, right? But you want to empower them to operate with totally different rules and, you know, to find solutions that disrupt ourselves, whether that is related to the product portfolio or how we operate with our farmers or supply chain or how we leverage digital health, for instance, and the intersection of digital health and personalized consumption. You know, that is about making sure we don't have a Kodak moment. And I think that we really need to have a very different process, different decision-making, different rules of operation, different freedom, different ecosystem, much more outside-in approach versus innovation for the tier 1 and 2 is much more inside-in or inside-out approach.
Let me stop you. You said something that obviously everyone chuckled at. You don't want to have a Kodak moment, right? You don't want to be disrupted in that way. Now, Kodak, of course, famously saw digital technology coming. They helped create part of it, but they were still helpless internally in terms of culture to make the changes necessary, right? And so when you think about your own organization, what can you identify already as a potential disruptor that could destroy your business? And just to give us an idea. Come on, I promised I'd keep these guys honest, right? So, so give us a couple of ideas.
Actually, I'm ahead of you because I already mentioned it. The intersection of digital health and personalized consumption. Okay. That's a potential big disruptor.
How is that, tell me, game that out. How would that be a threat to you and what can you do about it?
Well, of course, I think, you know, as you said, the parallel with Kodak, they had an enormous amount of invention, actually, right? Invention, and IP in the space of digital imaging. But I think they were married to their business model and leveraging and sweating the assets that they had and not willing, I think, it's you know, maybe unfair to comment because I don't know all the details, but, you know, really disrupting yourself and making the change and building that parallel business and testing it and failing fast, you know, in different rules and learning from it. And, you know, if it gets traction, then you bring it into the mainstream business.
Peter, you know, when you inspire your young whippersnappers that you have at Singularity University coming in, you encourage them to come up with ideas that can affect a billion people, right?
A billion people, yeah.
You know, think big. I sat in on one of your executive sessions a couple of years ago, and I remember thinking to myself that, you know, these are all incredibly enthusiastic, ambitious, youngish people. What chance do you think do the companies on the Fortune 500 have in a world? Are we getting to a world? Again, people who follow the S&P or Fortune 500, we know that mostly this is a group of companies that are dying off, right? If you took a snapshot 30 years ago or 50 years ago, most of those companies don't exist on these rankings anymore. So there's constant sort of rejuvenation. Many of them are dying off. When you look to the future, do you see that it's going to be mostly companies whose names we don't even know yet?
So I think what Guy said is right on. If you're not disrupting yourself, someone else will, constantly. And what's going on, what people don't, I think, realize is that the technologies that are democratizing right now, from cloud computing, sensors, synthetic biology, I mean, the fact that you have high school kids and college kids actually going into the lab and creating molecules and playing with life forms to be able to create the particular future drinks that we might want, the notion that these tools are democratizing globally. And on top of that, what's going on is we're going from 2 billion people connected on the internet right now in 2010 to 5 billion people connected by 2020. Add on top of that these 3 billion new minds entering the global conversation are going to start to have access to better health and better learning capabilities. And someone in the middle of Pakistan has access to the same 1,000 computers on the Amazon cloud servers that I do. And so literally the power to do what only the largest corporations and governments had the ability to do before is now in the hands of everybody. And so now any single person may not have a true innovation, but multiply that times the millions of people who are innovating against the team of scientists inside your company, and you've got a real challenge. So the question is, if you're dependent on innovation coming from inside of your company, you're dead. I think it's the numbers are against you, because I do believe, and we do talk at Singularity University, we call it 10 to the 9th plus impact. We encourage our students to come up with product, services, company ideas that have the ability to impact 1 billion people within a decade, because that's the game that you can play these days. Add to that the notion that the world's biggest problems, the world's biggest grand challenges are the world's biggest market opportunities. So if you want to go become a billionaire, you attack food, health, learning, all of these things. And we're going to have this explosion of innovation. We haven't seen anything yet. The next 7 years, as we go from 2 to 5 billion people connected on the internet, and we democratize the tools that we teach at SU and you're talking about here, are going to see literally companies and product ideas popping up all over the world that no company can defend itself against. So you actually have
and as you say, not all these are going to be winners. In fact, most of them won't.
Most of them will be losers.
But there'll be more shots on goal.
But
and so some of them are going to get in.
Multiply the numbers out.
Right.
And it's extraordinary.
Yeah.
And so, what we teach at SU and XPRIZE is how do you tap into these? How do you actually surf on top of that versus being, crushed by it? Because I think that's a mindset, and I really welcome people to argue the other point. If you don't believe that, I'm seeing a very different world.
There are advantages to incumbency, scale. One can argue the newcomers may not have access to distribution. There are still big capital markets.
Sure, but now
these are the traditional advantages.
But distribution starts to get disintermediated with 3D printing around the world. What used to be, it used to be that companies would make multi-billion, tens of billion-dollar asset investments. But now those asset investments, or having 200,000 employees, are literally what prevents you from pivoting. I'm sorry, but I view this as sort of the old prehistoric era where if you were large as a large organism, I'll call them dinosaurs, that was your advantage. And then an asteroid hit, and you had to be nimble and quick. Well, the asteroid that's hitting are these exponential technologies.
Right. Let's go to the audience. Let's have some questions. I see a quick hand way near the back in the middle. Again, please identify yourself. Make it a question, not a long speech.
Absolutely. Devin Holmes from Warrior Gateway. We are a nonprofit, work with veterans and military families. My question is about driving innovation in the nonprofit sector, where culturally we haven't been aligned to take risks, and the philanthropic financial engine that invests in us is also not aligned to incentivize risk-taking innovation in nonprofits.
Great question. Somebody want to pick it up? Guy?
Yes, I think it's maybe not about just in the nonprofit sector, but we refer many times to the Golden Triangle. I really do believe that innovation happens at intersections, and whether that is intersections of technology like computer sciences, bioengineering, and nanotechnology, for instance. It's also, for me, I believe in innovating new business models in the intersection between NGOs, civic society, and business. And I can give you a great example of how we impacted 50,000 people's farmers in Kenya and Tanzania, working with NGOs and the local government, doubling their income with long-term contracts over 10 years. I'm going to spare you all the details. But this is where value is win-win-win for NGOs, government, and business.
OK, so I still have some sympathy for what you're saying in the audience. The question of the tolerance for failure, for example, which is an essential part of innovation, when I've looked at the nonprofit sector, has not been very great, the traditional philanthropies. But I think you are seeing a dynamism, for example, with new kinds of hybrid business models that are emerging. And if you look at, for example, social venture funds like Acumen Fund out of New York, you're seeing a new breed of philanthro-capitalists. To quote my colleague Matthew Bishop, who's written a book on this topic, I do think there's dynamism emerging, but it may not be the traditional actors.
I would also say that I think the whole crowdfunding arena is enabling you to take bigger risks right now. If, in fact, you have something that's so passionate and such a moonshot, to use my friend Astra Teller, Google's nomenclature, that people want to back you to take that shot. And where there was $2.8 billion in crowdfunding last year, and there's scheduled to be by like $15 billion of crowdfunding by the end of 2015, yeah, the traditional funder may not want you to take risks, but the public does.
Wait, we have a question in the back row, and then we'll come up here. There's move the microphone to the front. Go ahead, sir.
Great. My name is Luis, president of Imaginatic. This panel's on innovation management, so my question is, how are each of your organizations hiring Colonel Drakes? And what do you do with them when you bring Colonel Drakes in? Going back to Vijay's opening comment. Because legacy companies without Colonel Drakes can't do anything very impressive.
So talent management in a way. Guy.
Okay, so you know, if I use the tier 1, 2, 3 to support the ongoing business, you have to have a certain, you know, hiring DNA, which we have, and you know, crystallized in 3 words: attract, develop, retain are the words that we use. That absolutely is unfit for breakthrough and disruptive innovation. It is more about attract, benefit both ways, release. You know, people are not interested in a 20-year career in that environment. So absolutely, I think you have to segment hiring practices and talent management. I hope that answers the question.
We've tried something a little bit different for attracting specific types of talent in the Columbus, Ohio area, where we're collaborating to create these ecosystems or partnerships across the 4 major industries in the region with Ohio State, with Battelle, which is a research institute, to build talent that we can share with exactly that concept. You're getting best and brightest people who can work on a problem and go from a retail industry to a healthcare industry to a financial services industry to a university system that don't want to just come and work in one company. They want to work in a lot of different problems. And so it's a creative way to try to work out talent attraction that not only benefits our companies, but it actually benefits the region. So it's a different way of approaching talent.
A short point on this?
And I think the other question is, there has to be a sea change right now, which is the question is, do you have to actually employ these people? Because a lot of the most talented people in the world may not want to come to work for you. And the question is, can you use crowdsourcing, can you use incentive competitions, in fact, to get the results you want for the most talented people in the world, no matter where they are, but not have them as an employee? Get the result, get the breakthrough that you need from the crowd.
That's a great point, and we'll have an incentive challenge winner presented later in the day today. You'll hear more about that. Let's have a question, gentleman who's been very patient.
Thank you. Steve Brandt, a sustainability strategy from Los Angeles. And my question for Peter, the young people, I understand, have a global mindset. They sort of see a one human family dynamic, and that's what companies need to sort of represent in order to get them to work for them. So I'm wondering if you have any insights into that whole younger people seeing that even though there are nations, we are really one global family, and maybe there's some way that we need businesses to be more peace-oriented than war-oriented. Do you deal with that dynamic?
Okay, so young people values a shift.
So, I mean, I think there is a very different shift going on right now, and it has a few different things. I think young people have a global view because of the fact that national boundaries are becoming more and more porous over time, which I think companies need to realize, especially in healthcare is one area. But I also think what's going on is there's a very big change in privacy expectations, where young people care far less about privacy than older people do. Maybe they will eventually become interested in privacy, but they don't right now. And I think we're entering a lot of fundamental change again in healthcare, where people are willing to give up more and more privacy for the benefits. I'll share my entire genome so that my AI can tell me you have the same genome and you took this drug or ate at this restaurant and had this ill effect, and therefore I want to know about this, right? I also think the realization that products and services that are highly regulated in the United States may end up launching overseas because regulations are too slow to change given the rapid rate of technological change. So that's all going on.
Quick question here. I see we have a, did I see a hand? OK, well, maybe over here then. We have a lady with the hand up over here, just in front of the banister. Just a couple of minutes, so please make it short.
Sure. Tracy Laney. I work for Gap Inc., so Gap brand, among many others. And I'm curious about this notion of, the current Fortune 500 and the future evolution. And I think one thing we think a lot about as a online and brick and mortar apparel retailer is the future of that. And how do we take, with Amazon changing and the entire customer experience is changing, and how do you take your legacy assets but not turn into Kodak and use those assets as a way to innovate and think about what you uniquely bring to the table that can't be easily replicated, even in a completely changing world?
Can you have your cake and eat it too?
I think you can. I think that it's participating in this, whether you're the person in Pakistan, a nonprofit, or a Fortune 500, and how you participate. One of the assets that Fortune 500s have that are useful to that ecosystem are your information assets. People need information to analyze problems and actually solve them. And so one of the things that we have started to do is actually look at not only physical assets, like bricks and mortar, but also information assets. And almost like you curate them like you have a museum, right? And you have owners for that information, and you can make them useful and participate in that global innovation and crowdsourcing process with the access to the data itself.
We happen to have just a little bit of time, so the lady here can get the final question.
Hi, my name is Andrea Wong, and I work for the World Economic Forum. I had a question about cross-cultural innovations, and what are some techniques to really drive innovation across the board on a global level, given that 80% of the consumers by 2020 will come from emerging markets, and so you probably want to tap into kind of the local mindset, which might be very different from a corporate perspective than here in the Western world.
So when you say cross-cultural, you don't mean the team has people of different cultures on it. You're talking about reaching emerging markets or other cultures other than your home market.
Exactly.
OK. Somebody, yeah, go ahead.
We have a business in China, and with healthcare delivery in China is very different than it is in the United States. And of course, Cardinal is a services company, so we're always reinventing. It's how you survive as a service company. You always have to create new value. So we're finding things that we can do in China with direct-to-patient services, for example, that have application back in the US and vice versa. So creating that constant best practice sharing is something that we're doing on a regular basis.
Go ahead, Peter.
I'll add very quickly, we just launched last year the Qualcomm Tricorder X Prize, a $10 million competition to build a handheld mobile device that you can talk to, cough on, do a finger blood prick, diagnose you better than a team of board-certified doctors. We had 275 teams enter the competition in the first 12 months. Amazingly, the majority of those teams came from outside the United States. We had teams from India, Pakistan, and so forth. What you're going to start to see is in countries that have very little resources, again, small boxes, you have epic innovation coming out of them. So see a shift over the next decade ahead.
Great. On that inspirational note, we are out of time. Please join me in thanking our wonderful panel.